All of the students in the room who were watching Unscripted had bingo cards that coordinated to stuff that would
Oh, yes.
Digital integration is not a luxury, it's a necessity.
It was I probably felt God's hand more in like my career, my life in that moment than a lot of other moments.
Unscripted played a really major role in like the catalyst to especially my podcast and everything like that. I would say the reason for that is simply realizing and understanding that students live online.
There's a lot I've messed up in my years of youth ministry, but that is one thing that I'm really proud of. Like in the middle of the pandemic, there was not a blink. Ministry kept going.
We're gonna try something different.
The president's words come after the World Health Organization today declared the coronavirus a global pandemic.
I remember this very clearly.
I mean, obviously I came down to Parkview in February of 2020.
The Thursday before we went home, we were like, yeah, there's something happening in the world. That's not gonna affect us. On Friday, it became clear that
Which, for context, I started on Monday.
maybe we'd miss a couple of weeks of meeting
Youth
together.
crew, yeah.
And I have been toying around for a while with like a YouTube show. Like in my mind that there was like, we were just not speaking a digital language at all.
Going there, Darren had a very kind of a new perspective on what he thought ministry would be, right? So he was already kind of starting to talk about like, hey, how do we take digital and kind of infuse that with what, you know, historical youth ministry has been.
You know, in the grand scheme of the engine of ministry, there was no time to dream a dream, right? Well, COVID forced us to do that. I kind of laid out this idea for basically a variety show, some kind of YouTube-y. And I said, you know, if we decided to do this, I think we probably need to do a week or two and it'd be a good beta test. So could we film a show?
Yeah.
Right. And over the weekend, we came up with the whole concept for the YouTube show and shot it on Monday.
Well, I'd only been there for like 3-4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm fine with. So then obviously it happens. You'd only been there 3 to 4 hours. It was kind of like, hey, we need somebody to be the guy. And obviously I was like, the same day we started filming was the same day that they were like, hey, everybody's got to go home. And
everybody was packed in tightly into a room, and they had a live.
As we're in this like, hey, don't go by people time, like, and then let's just cram all these people into a room. Remember, like everyone was like on vacation, getting married, and took PTO. I was the new guy.
Right.
You were like the longest tenured person in the room.
it was I probably felt God's hand more in like my career, my life in that moment than a lot of other moments.
And that was your first day in the office.
Yep.
We all came in. I was like, hey, Nick, no time to onboard you. We're filming the show.
So then on our first day of filming this digital piece of it, where there was a worship element and kind of this hosting element and stuff like that, filmed the first episode of Unscripted at the church.
Not socially distanced whatsoever.
What's a choice?
And the whole student ministry team got in there. We filmed the show, and at 11:30, we got a message from the executive pastor saying, bye, everybody. We'll see ya.
That was the same day we started filming was the same day that they were like, hey, everybody's got to go home and just for 2 weeks.
Everybody thought at that point, probably till Easter.
But nobody really knew how crazy it was going to get. Everybody was just it was the rumor phase of COVID.
And making fun of it, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Like, this is so stupid. And so much so that, like, things were changing so quickly that we filmed that thing not socially distant on Monday. And by the time it aired on Wednesday, we had to put out a statement that said, this was filmed before social distancing was a requirement, you know?
A little time goes by, maybe 3-4 days. 3 people show up to my house with equipment, being like cameras, microphones, a table, chairs. Now all this planning, vision is starting to happen like we're doing this right now on a Zoom call.
How much we had to pivot in that time is still just a little bit crazy when I think about it.
And then my wife and I looked at each other and we go, we don't have room in this spot, right? Because we're living downtown Chicago in a high rise.
700 square foot apartment with his kid and his wife.
Every single week when we would film, we would have to move the couch out, move the chairs out, right? We'd have to bring everything, kind of stack it on top of each other by the kitchen, do the set, do the show.
You know, we were filming group stuff on Zoom calls and trying to figure out where's the most appropriate place to set up a studio where only one person can press play, and
then put it all back together and send it. So then I'm running over to the camera, right? I'm getting out, I'm looking at the screen, right? Because I turned the screen around, I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, that looks good. Then I'm running back to the camera, clicking record, then I'm running back to the chair and starting.
Heart of COVID era for Unscripted, which I didn't even like start working on Unscripted until episode like 22 or something like that. I was kind of later after some of the kinks had been fleshed out, I guess.
So it went through the completely remote, like everyone from their houses, every bit via a like cell phone camera.
Yeah.
Like I remember Darren sent us all like desktop tripods so that we could like via Amazon so that we could have stable, you know, pictures and not like this.
I mean, the hashtag the world's greatest drink kind of happened out of nowhere. What happened was I was all of a sudden like, I'm just gonna have to just pull everything out that I can think of and hopefully something sticks. It's kind of like when you're just like throwing everything you can at something and you're like, one of these things works, great.
so students were tuning in because that was the only connection with humans they had, which I thought
Those
was
are like
good.
only live anything.
It
Like,
was,
sports was gone. Like
Yeah, everything was gone. Everything was gone, but we were still having church. And we were one of the few. And I will tell you, like, there's a lot I've messed up in my years of youth ministry, but that is one thing that I'm really proud of. Like, in the middle of the pandemic, there was not a blink. Ministry kept going. And that wasn't just me. That was a large team that made that happen. I could have never done that by myself.
yeah.
And I remember that being a big part of me joining Unscripted was like, we're making this the thing. It went from being the COVID strategy to being the way they were going to move forward with youth ministry.
Now I will say during COVID and when I was filming at my house, right, there were some moments there too where I was like, oh, this feels like God's doing something. COVID and Unscripted allowed us to say, hey, maybe this is what church youth ministry could look like. Maybe it could be more progressive thinking.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure.
I think it could also be.
What I remember most was just innovative thinking.
I think churches need to make a shift, and I felt like Unscripted was a vision of what that shift could look like.
Then it was so successful and also super a lot of fun. And also it became very clear that we had not been speaking the language of our constituency, that it became something that we permanently added to what we do.
It was a really cool thing to do. It was something that got into people's houses. It was something that engaged students on a level that they were already familiar with. I mean, students know about YouTube shows.
LaCroix's all I got, so I guess hashtag world's greatest drink. I don't even really like LaCroix.
My favorite drink, LaCroix. I am one of those guys, so it's so refreshing every time.
But then we started like building that into the nomenclature of what we did. And
Hashtag the world's greatest people, but this is actually hashtag the world's greatest drink.
every semester we would do a hashtag world's greatest drink bracket, and kids would get to vote on what that season's drink were going to be. Like, it just...
Where when we hit the duck squeak, they had to play Duck Duck Goose to it.
Hashtag world's greatest drink, and then all of a sudden we would start hiding LaCroix's in spots and stuff like that.
Did an episode on pets, which is why I'm wearing this shirt. And I loved it because kids were so engaged with sending in pictures of their pets. We couldn't be in person yet.
I think another very absurd thing that we did was that whole duck thing.
The search for Chuck.
The search for Chuck.
Chuck! Is he in there? He's not here.
A mascot, also something that came accidentally, Chuck the Duck.
Sci-fi Saga was a blast. I know that was happening.
So fun.
It was so fun. Minecraft server was a tragic affair. I spent probably like so long trying to set up a Minecraft server.
So Chuck got lost or kidnapped, or I don't even remember now what the exact story was, except we just spent all summer looking for him, right?
If you found the duck and texted into a certain number in a certain amount of time, you would win a prize that coordinated to a theme, because each week was themed.
And all of a sudden COVID happened and it kind of felt like, okay, this is the reason that I'm supposed to be here. So for me, it was a very fulfilling time. COVID was, I would say, where I think for a lot of people, it was not that. However, when we got students in there filming and students in there doing audio, I think when these students all of a sudden like kind of took, they grabbed onto this idea of Unscripted and they felt like they owned it and belonged to it. That's the thing that was actually worth everything that we did.
Yes, there was a lot of trial and error with Unscripted, especially in all eras of Unscripted. There was tons of trial and error, right? I don't think we ever fully came out of Unscripted with like, this was the best format and we kept it the whole way through.
The interesting thing, which I don't think is actually that interesting, but really kind of blew people away, was how much more open kids were on Zoom than they were in person.
Yeah.
Because they're in their room, they're in their natural environment, they may or may not have to be on camera, but there was not the intimidation factor of sitting in a room and wondering what you're thinking about me. There was some kind of invisible protection for them being on camera, which worked pretty well.
But as we look ahead to this next wave of generation, like we have to find a way to find ourselves online with Gen Z, definitely with Gen Alpha. Like it's all they know.
Right.
And they can shift between in-person and online into that hybrid space back and forth as if it's nothing.
The ones that we filmed in a bunch of different locations.
Oh yeah, that was
They were great. They were so well done. And it was a series over the course of 4 weeks about the impact you can make on the world.
yeah.
And
We were like on location and like that was so fun, I thought.
Great, and that I would end up carrying into the future was pre-filming talks. And even when we ended up in a context where that wasn't necessary anymore, it really helps you frame exactly what you want to say, the way you want to say it, in a medium that's going to live in perpetuity beyond you.
Yeah, I think the other benefit to that whole part of it, right, was that it democratized like the week, the day that you could film as well.
I love that.
I was able to I was able to work as the guy who produced Unscripted and made sure everything was running on Wednesdays, and then I could still also volunteer on Thursdays as a small group leader.
After 3 years or however many years of us doing it, once restrictions started lifting, once people started coming back in the room, and frankly wanting to be back in the room, like we needed to find a way to pivot and adjust. And I still think we did. But again, like I was telling you before we started hitting record, was we started at that point then with the baseline of online. And so then we were like, how much do we sprinkle in person because of how good online is? Where like a church where I'm at now is like, we started with in person. And so now we have to try to like add the hybrid moment, the digital pieces to it to help create that good like intersection between both in person and online.
Relationships start in person and then they can transition to digital, meaning you live in the same state as me, we're friends, and then you move away, but we still continue being friends.
Even if your hybrid experience doesn't kick off in the room like you want to, it might reach one or two people that you wouldn't have reached otherwise.
Yeah, and like now, the adaptation, like we have a fully in-person model essentially, right?
Yeah.
However, I still see the value in the content, the teaching content in particular, like having a home beyond just when it's preached, right? And we don't have the live streaming capabilities, which is why we do the pre-film. But that can also that anchors our social media strategy.
We learned that social media is for interaction, not for advertisement. I think that we learned that a digital, what we call in our context digital integration, is not a luxury, it's a necessity. You have to figure it out. Our students are not just digital natives, they're digital dependents. And if we are not harnessing whatever level of digital medium we can harness, then we're missing an opportunity to speak the language of the people that we're working with. And so I don't view everything through the lens of how does this translate digitally, but I definitely view our ministry through the lens of where is the digital expression of what we're trying to communicate to kids long term?
Yeah.
So
The argument I felt at the time was, should we do in person? Should we do online? And I was like, how about both? Right? And the tension, Sam, in all of that is both takes resources. My learnings, right, for the in the room side of things was like, the show probably needed a refresh and a rebrand to distance it from COVID and not make it the COVID thing anymore. Because while it was still good, it still carried all those connotations. And then on the YouTube side of things, we just needed to double down on some like titling, keyword, and research, like artistic thumbnail renders.
Which means that churches exist for two groups of people.
Correct. Insiders and outsiders.
Here we go. I wonder if those things, being digital and in person, interact with those two groups differently.
Like it's more accessible than I thought it was to create a digital like moment. Like, you know, once we shifted away from the show and to a new church and we were here, like we did an entire like 6 months worth of content off of a cell phone.
yeah, yeah.
The church exists to change the world, and to be a family, and to create a place for people to find meaning and belonging.
Okay.
I think that there can be entertaining elements within church. I encourage youth pastors and youth ministries to create entertaining elements on their social media. That's why most people get on social media nowadays, is to be entertained in some form or fashion.
So some kind of message or whatever on the regular. I think it's super important to post regularly. Whether you know how to do it or not, you play dumb for a student. Because there is a student who definitely knows how to do it. Investing in, and I wouldn't know what these are, but this guy will. Investing in some subscription services or whatnot that can help you do this easier.
Servicing millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, by the way, middle schoolers and on down. And so the church has to figure out how to speak their language because they're the next generation.
I'd subscribe to your TikTok and your YouTube. He didn't pay me for that. I really would, and I am. So you should be too.